Fort William, a small town on the banks of the long drawn-out Loch Linnhe in the Western Highlands of Scotland, is the starting point of our journey. This, the hub of the region's tourist industry, boasts a proud and eventful history. It began with the construction of a fort in the 17th century, a remote outpost of civilization. It was a wild land, and this great fortress of the English army controlled access to the Great Glen. Around the Fort William garrison, a new settlement grew and an increasing number of people found their home here. The town developed and eventually became a major transport centre. But in 1867, the fort had to make way for the construction of a railroad, and a railway station was duly built here. This also marked the beginning of tourism in this region and served as a major route to various destinations in the Western Highlands. There's a tiny museum. And in the pedestrianised area, a number of shops and businesses. Framed by perfectly restored buildings and inviting public houses. Close to the gates of the city, the Caledonian Canal begins. It connects Loch Linnhe on the west coast to Inverness on the east coast. The beginning of this splendid canal, which leads to Loch Lochy, is called Neptune's Staircase. Covering a distance of only 1.5 kilometers, the boats are raised over 8 congestion levels in order to overcome 20 meters of geological fault. Scottish engineer Thomas Telford worked on the canal from 1803 to 1849, as well as its connection to several lochs. The Caledonian Canal meant that the circumnavigation of the northern tip of Scotland was no longer necessary, so saving time, money, and lives. Today the canal is used for leisure trips to Fort Augustus, Loch Ness and Inverness. At Fort William Station, a train known as the Jacobite is awaiting its passengers. The attendant is dressed in traditional Highland clothing. Both he and the Jacobite are photographed by tourists from each corner of the world. British Railways have revived the charm of a bygone age and brought back to life the age of the steam locomotive. The firing of the boiler and its resultant steam are a sight to behold. The train gradually starts to move, and the Jacobite begins its journey on one of the most beautiful railway routes in the world. Soon, we've crossed the impressive Caledonian Canal. Next, the line travels along the foothills of Loch Linnhe and negotiates a bend to the west at Fort William as the route becomes increasingly narrow. The West Highland Railway was one of the last lines to have been built in Scotland and was once used for commercial traffic. Trains transported fresh fish to various cities. The line was inaugurated in 1894 and was soon extended to Mallaig. Suddenly, it emerges in the distance. The bridge that made film history with Harry Potter's magic train, the Hogwarts Express. At a slower pace, our train rumbles into Curve's Viaduct across Loch Shiel. Glenfinnan is 380 metres long and the railway line is a spectacular 30 metres above the valley. It's a tradition that while travelling over the viaduct, the driver releases steam from the engine and shows a white flag. The green pastures of Loch Shiel pass slowly by. It's a truly nostalgic experience. The train disappears between trees and rocky slopes. The splendid landscape captivates with each new turn. And those taking photographs take the opportunity to focus on the entrance to Glenfinnan Station. The sound of bagpipes greets us as we arrive on the platform of the first station of our journey. We're certainly in Scotland. Located in the station, the West Highland Railway Museum is well worth a visit. Here, the origin of this railway line is documented with photos, plans, technical equipment and furnishings. Lots of objects from the line's numerous stations are on display, including nameplates and cash tills. Memories of a bygone age and full of that special nostalgia that only steam railways can provide. Nearby, Scottish history was made. A single tower, the Glenfinnan Monument, marks the Jacobite risings which began at Loch Nanoam. High up, Up on the tower, the imposing figure of a Highlander gazes across Loch Shiel. Prince Charles Edward Stuart landed here in 1745 in order to reconquer the Kingdom of Scotland for his father. Just a year later, following the Battle of Culloden, he was forced to abandon his venture, although some loyal Highlanders remained at his side. Over 1,000 Highlanders gathered here upon his arrival, but when fleeing, he was almost alone. When the Jacobite returns to the viaduct, history seems to be close by, as we recall that dark chapter of Scottish history. The train is waiting as passengers walk back to the station. The familiar sound of bagpipes receives us once again, and the journey resumes. The final station is still some distance away. Everyone is attempting to locate their carriage, and suddenly we discover a distinguished passenger, a young Harry Potter. All the passengers are now on board, and the engine driver and his stokers are also at the ready. Because the line is only a single track, the train has to wait at the station until an oncoming train has passed by. Then we're away, a total of 270 kilometers through wild hills, dark swamps, and rugged coastline. The Scottish Highlands are remote, barren, and hostile, and home to Ice Age glaciers. Life for the people of this region was hard and full of privation, and survival was only possible within a tribal community, the clan. Prior to their eventual overthrow, the heads of the clans were tantamount to being minor kings surrounded by a royal household. There were bards, storytellers, bagpipers, and tacksmen armed with two-handed Scottish swords. Water is everywhere, and sea lochs penetrate deep inland. The dramatic interplay of both rocks and water gives the landscape a truly dramatic appearance, even in good weather, which is relatively rare. When climbing, the train barely reaches 30 miles an hour, but soon increases speed when the landscape allows. Unspoiled scenery passes by, and the stokers continue to shovel in the coal. The Jacobite suddenly seems to be racing ahead. By way of the steam engine, it was the Scots who revolutionized transport facilities and awakened a global interest in locomotive transport. In 1765, the Industrial Revolution was given a huge boost by James Watt, an instrument maker at Glasgow University. He was sponsored by industrial magnate Matthew Boulton. The steam-tight cylinder was invented, and further constantly changing developments by various inventors eventually led to those made by George Stephenson. In 1814, for the Killingworth mine, he built his first locomotive named the Rocket, the first to have a chimney. The force of steam was transferred to a crank handle, which was directly connected to various drive wheels. The acclaimed Locomotion No. 1 became a legend and entered service on the first international passenger railway. But it had to stop several times so that it could produce the required amount of steam. The Royal George was created, much larger and with 3 coupled pairs of wheels, and with eductor pipes that led directly to its chimney. But it was Stephenson's rocket that finally won the day. The rocket became a global prototype. It contained most of the components that would play a role in locomotive construction for the following 100 years. We pass by the sound of Mallaig and enter the station. A short stop at Mallaig to allow some passengers to disembark. Off again, and we've changed direction, now travelling north. The further north, the more spectacular the scenery. Pristine and unpopulated landscapes with treeless hills gradually changed to the rugged coastline of the Hebridean Sea. The comfortable carriages provided great view. From time to time, the rocky shore of the Sound of Sleat archipelago appears as the train makes its way along the meandering tracks. It was not until the beginning of the 19th century that a road was built here, the Road to the Isles, opening the way for holiday traffic. The A830 squeezes itself in between sea and railroad. The monks of Mallaig called this rocky stretch of land the rough borderland. films such as Local Hero and Highlander have been shot here, adding a vague familiarity to the scenery. The Jacobite steams its way ahead. Then suddenly, from out of nowhere, the first buildings appear. We arrive at our final destination. The train pulls slowly into Mallaig. The passengers disembark from the carriages and gather to take one last look at the Jacobite. The stoker shovels coal from the tender. And on the platform, a young boy from Mallaig welcomes the new arrivals with skillfully played bagpipes. The small station is built of rough stone, as for most of the year it is subjected to harsh weather. The inhabitants of Mallaig earn their living from fishing. In the harbour, fishing boats are repaired. Independence in such a remote area as this is a precondition for survival. Mallaig is the commercial fishing capital on the west coast of Scotland. In the 1960s it was kippers, but today it's mainly crabs. At that time, the region's famous smoked kippers were produced here, but now there's only one traditional smokehouse still in use. Tourism is gradually becoming more important, with both short and long stays in various hotels and guest houses. Mallaig was founded in the 1840s. At that time, Lord Lovat, owner of the North Morar estate, divided the Mallaig farm into 17 lots. Aided by religious faith and hope, several families settled here. Lord Lovat advised his tenants to try their hand at fishing. Little else was possible in this region. It was a daunting place to be. Following the arrival of the railway and subsequent road services, a ferry was also introduced. Now ferries travel to the Isle of Skye and other small islands. Several times a week, large fish auctions are held and the small town continues to prosper. Now this remote place has become an important centre of transport and holiday destination. The Jacobite has made it possible, along with one of the most beautiful railroads in the world.